AMA with the legendary Ramli. Really excited to ask him all of the questions on product-led onboarding. So I'll give some quick background, some housekeeping, and then we'll dive in. So these AMAs are really for you. So everyone in this group to ask the thought leaders in the product-led space all of your burning questions. So very low-key, casual. You can either raise your hand to ask a question, or in the Slack community of the Appcues Slack community, there's a channel called AMA Discussions. If you ask your question there, we will get to it quicker, and we will actually, even if we don't get to it, we'll make sure that Ramli or someone on our team responds. So we can have kind of a live stream of what's going on. But otherwise, feel free to just chime in. So I'm really, really excited to have Ramli here today. So just some quick background. He is literally the expert on product-led onboarding because he wrote the book on it. So in addition to having his career as a growth marketer, he's built the really, really, really successful product-led community, which I'm sure a lot of you are in, where he advises product-led companies and has a lot of great thought leadership on the topic. And so now Ramli has recently moved to his next adventure at Appcues, where he is their new director of content. So Ramli, I'd love if you can give a little introduction to yourself and what you'll be talking about today. I'll kick off with a few questions and then we can open it up to the group.
Thanks for that intro. Very flattering to all the things you said. You already mentioned a few things. I was leading up the training program at Product Led, and a big fan of what you all are doing here with Product Led sales. So I'm super excited about that. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about product led onboarding, but I'm a big proponent of actually human assisted, sales assisted onboarding. I showed some data about like how the biggest companies, like even Slack, which you traditionally think is, hey, they're product led. You look at their S1 filing because they're a public company, and like 60% of their revenue came from sales, and that's sales assisted. So, I'd love to dig in how like sales fit into product led onboarding, as well as like how things can, sales can work with product growth and everything else to deliver this seamless product led experience.
I love it. So on a very relevant topic then, I'd love to start with how you define user onboarding and how sales or sales assist fits into a product led onboarding experience.
Yeah. Traditionally, when people think about onboarding, they define it as, right after a user signs up, and right when and I hear this all the time, you can't bring up onboarding without bringing up the aha moment. And it's this magical place where a user finally gets your product. And there's a lot of misconception about that moment. And I argue that misconception it kind of harms onboarding more than it actually does help. The way I define onboarding is there's 3 core milestones in user becoming a lifelong customer. I believe that's really the end goal of onboarding. It's really retention. And you hear a lot about growth, how retention is the key to any kind of growth, whether that's in SaaS, even e-commerce, where repeat customers are super important. Yeah, so those 3 key milestones are: first, when a user first perceives the value of a product, whether they're reading your landing page or they're on a call or they're hearing it from a friend. They first heard about it, so they're perceiving the value. The second is when they actually sign up and they experience it, that value. And it's like, they made this promise early on about how this tool is going to help my life or help my workflow. And now I've actually experienced it. So that's the second milestone. And the very third milestone, which I feel like is really the end goal of the initial onboarding, is when a user or a person adopts that value and becomes a regular user. I'm not going back to that example with Slack. Traditionally, like when you think about that aha moment, you think that aha moment is when somebody sends their first Slack message. But Stuart Butterfield, the CEO of Slack, said in an interview with an investor first round, said that they define an onboarded account, an onboarded team, as after they've sent 2,000 messages, because they're 93% more likely to stick around and continue using Slack going forward. So there's a huge opportunity to involve marketing and product marketing early on and to really define the messaging and the promise all the way to customer success, all the way to sales. I think sales has a really key, important role to make sure that people adopt that value, they adopt that product, and they not just become a paying customer, but actually ones that stick around for good.
I love it. I really appreciate breaking it down into 3 different moments and having that misconception of it might not just be onboarding is not just about logging in for the first time. It's really about realizing value. So I'm curious for folks that they're say, I'm setting up my first PLG onboarding experience. How do I do it? And sometimes like it's just like can feel very overwhelming. And so my question to you is what teams are involved? Like who owns this? Where does sales fit in versus marketing versus product versus growth, and what initiatives have to happen?
That's a good question around who owns it. I've actually seen different companies with different teams owning it. I've seen at Drift, this messaging tool, they have the product team owns onboarding, which is usually traditional in a product-led organization. But at another company like Jungle Scout, where sales assistant is super important for them, is actually this customer success team that owns onboarding there, as well as another place that I've seen, Sprout Social, where I had a chat with them, and it's customer marketing. It's the marketing team that owns onboarding. So my rule of thumb is whoever's closest to the customer, whether that's customer data in a product-led org like the Drift or Facebook or something else, usually is the growth team that has like the most visibility. But in other places, it's customer success. And then the second question is around like how they should work together, and that whole journey that I mentioned earlier from the beginning, from the initial stages of the customer journey, will involve product marketing and all the way from the ads that you share. I think super important to make sure that the promise and the wording and the messaging is consistent across the board. So I think that's why marketing needs to be involved, as well as sales. I think sales bring a lot of insight into, especially as, usually in larger B2B or in most companies I've seen, there's the self-serve route, and then there's a sales assisted route. And, often the self-serve team doesn't talk to the sales assisted team, and sales have so much insight as to like what pain points are people hearing over and over again. Where are they getting stuck, especially as they help them adopt the product or set up something. And I think that they really need to be involved more into the whole improving the whole onboarding process, as well. Obviously, the product, which the product team usually owns the in-app onboarding experience. That includes product tours or tooltips and things like that. So I think it really is a cross-functional effort. And I say this all the time, like it needs to be a team effort, because this is one of the most crucial moments in a customer journey, because it's a first impression the users will have. Like once you built that first impression with a product, it's super hard to get rid of it. It's like going on a networking event, or going on a date, or going on meeting your friend for the first time. Like you form that first impression with a person right away. Why? It's the same thing with products. Once you built that first impression, it's really, really hard, and it really needs to be a cross-functional effort to make sure that it's really seamless, and the messaging and the experience is really, it flows smoothly all the way through.
Yeah, no, I love that answer. And I love the fact that you mentioned, this isn't just marketing going to create some sort of experience and product with an in-app experience. It's really every team getting involved, which leads me to another question where it seems like onboarding covers a lot from a marketing, sales, and product perspective. And there's different ways to do onboarding, whether it's their first time on the product, it's a new user at an existing account, it's someone trying to get to the next level of value. How do you determine what kind of onboarding track each different user goes on to? So another way to phrase that is, how do you segment your user base and then determine which onboarding route to put them on? Yeah,
that's a really great question. And I got this actually from somebody from Copper. They've really recently, like, I think they help give kind of segmenting around this. And the way that I look at it is if you had a 4x4 matrix, and you had, like, on one axis you had customer fit and high product engagement. So the users who come in and they start trying out different things, those are really high product engagement. But if you have an idea of your ideal customer profile, and they, you see this user, they sign up hopefully with their work email. Now you have an idea of how many employees, and is it worth sales having this conversation based on their size and potential deal size. I think when that product engagement and customer fit is high, I think those are ones that are really, really good candidate for maybe some kind of soft sales outreach, whether that's just asking them, hey, it's better if it's contextual as well. It's like you knowing where they are in the product, the customer journey. It's like, oh, I noticed you got stuck here. You need help. Just more more consultative, where you're really trying to get them to experience the value and then adopt the value rather than necessarily closing a deal. That's usually where I see a soft touch from a human, whether that's customer success or sales. When the product engagement is high and maybe the customer fit is not there, I would just let them explore the product, because it might not make sense financially to have a human outreach there, especially if you're now at the size where being profitable is super important. If I was a startup, I'm seeing high product engagement, I'd want to get on that and just ask, what are you doing? We'd love to help you. Give us much value. But typically those are more like the self-serve route there that you would want to see, and make sure that they just explore the product and get as much value from that. I mean, the other thing that I would suggest often is that giving people a chance to raise up their hands. I think often, especially with product led, we hide like, hey, if they want to talk to somebody, that's actually a good signifier that they're more likely to convert. So I think just giving them more options to like contact us, like even adding a contact us or a get help button is super surprising that I don't see it as often that I would like, even if it was just a chat, an app chat, and getting people to chat there, making it easy for people to contact somebody from your team is super, super helpful. The challenge now is if the product engagement is low, so like you have a user comes in and they're not really trying things around, I think there's opportunity there maybe to figure out, are they a good fit, or is there rooms for opportunity where your self-serve onboarding needs some love essentially, where they're getting lost and they're not getting enough guidance in that. So I think that's how I would typically cut it up, but it's definitely different companies. The sticky point is like, what point is a product engagement high enough and a customer fit enough for it to make sense to sales team? I think that's where there needs to be more conversation with product to get that product engagement data, with marketing to make sure that the right customer fit are coming into the door at the beginning.
Definitely makes sense. And that aligns well with the POCUS framework for customer fit, product engagement, for segmentation, which I love. I'm curious, so you talked a lot about where sales should reach out and using both you reaching out to them and them allowing to raise their hand. What other tactics, maybe from the marketing or product side, would you use for onboarding, whether it's tooling, whether it's just strategies or processes? What does that look like outside of sales?
Yeah, I think just early on, and this is something that I've seen work really well, especially if you're early on in designing your onboarding experience, will be just trying to really find out what your users are trying to initially accomplish with your product. So the challenge is for a lot of B2B products where you come in and you can do like 100 different things. Like I imagine like a CRM where now you can build a landing page, you can set up your social, you can, I don't know, send a newsletter. So like, where do you start? Like, where would you start onboarding it? And often the challenge is, let's just onboard them to everything. So you got this product tours where like, oh, here's how you post on Twitter. Here's how send a newsletter. Here's how, and what happens there, it gets super, super overwhelming for users, where like, you're telling me a lot of things. Imagine like being in class with a teacher and then they're just like a fire hose, or like, here's all the information, especially if it's something like physics, where like now they're talking about Newton and quantum. I'm not sure, I've never brought this up before. They're talking about quantum theory. They're talking about
going with it. I like where you're going.
Physics law. Here's like force times, acceleration. And it's like, whoa, 1 second. Like, what are we talking about here? And it might have been better early on. It's like, okay, what do you guys want to learn about physics today? And just asking that early on. And I think that's exactly, yeah, I know, right? I can't believe I'm talking about quantum physics here. But I think early on, just asking users as they come in, what are your main goal for accomplishing today?
Mhm.
Early on, when your onboarding is early, making that open-ended would be helpful, so you can like start getting data, whether it's just like an in-app survey. It's like, what is your primary goal for signing up with our tool today? You might not get as much people filling it out, but as you move forward, now you can start customizing or segmenting your self-serve onboarding to be like, okay, are you here to send a tweet, set up your social, or are you here to send your first newsletter, or are you here to work with sales? So now you're kind of segmenting them, and you're kind of adding more point of conversation for your sales team. Now you know, like, hey, this person came in because they're interested in doing social. Less like when now the conversation starts, like, oh, hey, I noticed you, Alexa. I noticed you sign up here to set up your social. Like you can increase your impressions and things like that with that. So now you're talking more in their language with that as well. Now both the self-serve and the sales experience are really targeted towards helping that user or that person accomplish why they signed up for in the first place. So I think that's usually my advice if people are just starting out, or even if they already have something where would be to be the challenges. It can do everything. I would segment it as early as possible to really like help out those users based on what their goals are.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm actually thrilled that you brought up the physics example, because had a little bit of an aha moment myself where, sometimes I'm signing up for a self-serve product and I'm trying to figure out like, okay, I came here for one reason, one specific use case. I just want value from that, and then I can figure out the rest later. But sometimes I'm so overwhelmed by all of it that I'm just like, okay, I can't get into this. I'm going to turn it off. So it's really important in that early days of onboarding to be able to, the end user, be able to say, okay, this end user wants to have this specific use case and get this specific value. Then we can slowly give them more and more value over time, but not give them too much that they're too confused.
Yeah. And I think the other advantage to that is now you can, instead of showing all the features and all the onboarding emails, now you can be like, just here's the 3 core features to help you accomplish that. Versus like now you can forget about the other things and really be hyper focused on showing them what they need to know, when they need to know to accomplish what they want to do.
Totally. Natalie had a question in the Slack. Do you want to chat about it, Natalie?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I find with like onboarding experiences, there's always that question of, do you build it and improve the actual product experience, or do you use something like an in-app guide tour? So curious, best practices for balancing those and just best practices for using those in-app tours.
Yeah, I would definitely start off figuring out exactly what going back to like, what are the first goals? Do you mind if I ask you if your product is B2B or B2C or something else?
B2B, yeah.
Do you have, I guess the other place I would start even before I start thinking about adding third-party tours is making sure it's a huge opportunity, and I don't see it often enough. It's like making sure your empty states are great. So empty states is when, especially with B2B products, where you need data or you need something to fill and to show value. Some best practices I have for that is in making sure, often when I see an empty state, I'm not sure if how many of you see this all the time, where it's like, nothing to see here. It's just, that's the empty state. And it's obvious that it's whether that's somebody who in engineering or somewhere else, where like, it's factually true that there's nothing to see there. But I think that's definitely an opportunity to say, hey, this place, this is what you can do. Here's what you're going to achieve here. And then have a call to action, particularly to get them going there. I think that does wonders. And I've seen a lot of onboarding tours where they don't even have any kind of onboarding experiences. We don't have any tours, but their empty state is super, super clear. That could be a place that to start off if, as you're starting to figure out what tours, exactly what you're going to bring on. As soon as you start thinking about tours, the way that I think about whether it's third party or first, I'm actually quite impartial. I know when your engineering team builds it out yourself, you might be able to see data even further. So like now you can like really see the impact on retention. With third parties, often a challenge to see like all the way. You can see how many of them potentially convert into a customer. Most third party apps, onboarding tours will help you see who converts. But in terms of retention data, I think really like that's when you really can get with with having backend data really flow all the way through. I would say those are things. And then going back to the tours, what I noticed your other question is best practices around tours. It's going back to that. I think if you segment it early on as to what their goal is trying to accomplish, what they're trying to accomplish in your app, then now your tour can, instead of being like 10 steps, because it's all the different things that they can do, it can be 3 steps, because now you know that they're trying to accomplish this one small thing. Just point out like those specific ones. The other best practice in terms of tours would be, it's okay to have like different levels of tours. So like it's like a video game. I think of, so this is the beginner tour, and then this is how you get. And once they've accomplished that, now you're gonna give them the intermediate tour. So like, oh, here's some other stuff that you can do once you've already accomplished this one goal in this use case, and then you could have an advanced tour. So that's usually how I break it up. Instead of like having one big tour, you cut it up into smaller tours to accomplish specific goals.
I love the video game reference. That is such a good visual also. Little modules, break it up into those. I'm going to pause and open it up to the community for any questions. You can just blurt out a question. Grant, I saw you unmuted.
I think it just unmuted without intention.
Oh, okay, never mind. Does anyone else have? Oh, go ahead.
A question I did have kind of was regard to, you mentioned kind of the onboarding experience as different homes and customer success and marketing. Can you give a little bit more of the rationale behind that and where it's successful for certain companies and why you would choose one over the other?
Yeah. So I've asked them why they did, especially the customer success one. It was actually, the conversation was with Jungle Scout. Oh man, I'm skipping my head now. Like their head of customer success at Jungle Scout. I can't recall the name. I'm sure you can find him on LinkedIn if you wanted to. The reason why was like they were finding that they needed their users, no matter how good the self-serve onboarding is, they needed some sales assist, and customer success was helping out a lot. And they found in their organization, customer success became like a cross-functional thing where they were working with product, they were working with marketing, they were working. So in that organization, and the customer success and experience team was the one who owned onboarding. In the other one that I've heard of, Sprout Social, it was customer marketing. And the reason why was they were very marketing led in terms of their approach to the way that they acquire customers. And so then it's customer marketing who managed all of the onboarding programs, their academy that they had. They work with customer success to figure out the right path to segment those users when they need sales assist. As well as the product-led teams like Drift, typically the product team is the one that owns onboarding. So I guess it depends if you're customer-led, product-led, or marketing-led. So I think that's a super easy, maybe a rule. I just noticed it now. It might be a rule of thumb to see how you're approaching your go-to-market strategy there would be like typically where most of the data and emphasis falls through in terms of what kind of onboarding, who owns onboarding in your company.
Yeah, kind of interesting. It almost feels like you're highlighting it's whoever has kind of the multiple touch points that can make the customer onboarding experience kind of resonate well. So if you're marketing led and it really depended on the messaging that you pointed that got the customer interested, you want them to maintain that experience and then point them in the right place in the company. If it's kind of multifaceted product and a whole bunch of different teams that need to make sure that onboarding experience is unified and up to the expectations that were set before they signed up, then you may have something like a customer success organization. But yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Hey, Ramli, thanks for your insights. It's clear you've studied a lot of different companies in the PLG space. One of the questions I have is, are you aware of any precedent of successful companies that have really overstaffed on onboarding, especially for their free product, where the return, an ROI calculator on it is going to be upside down for a very long time, but with the intention of not only moving people through a product journey, but also just getting a reputation in market as one that really values service. So would love to just hear any insight from you on any companies that you might be aware of where they just heavily invested in live help people to onboard even at a free level. Thank you.
At a free level, yeah, that's a good question. I have a hunch that man, I have to really get the guy's name now. The folks at Jungle Scout, that's what they did, where they really like heavily invested. They really, I'm just looking at my computer right now, head of customer success, where they really have heavily invested to a point where I think the exact scenario that you mentioned.
Mhm.
And Danny Villarreal, there it is. Let me get his LinkedIn here.
Everyone's going to DM him right after this call.
Yeah.
I think that based on my conversation with him, this is exactly what happened for them, where their activation rate was not very good, and they heavily invested there. I should give him a heads up. I should give him a heads up that I just dropped his LinkedIn here. But they really heavily they got on Pendo. They brought on Pendo. They brought on more customer success teams. They heavily invested in their training academy, and then they started doing like weekly Zoom calls for the onboarding calls and webinars. And then another really interesting thing they did was they took their English onboarding and noticed that their second biggest market is in China. So they translated the whole onboarding to Chinese, which is like, what the heck? Like that's super next level, like really like not just segmenting based on use case, but segmenting based on geography and language is what they did there. So I think that's a good example where now they're really growing because of their investment there.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Hey, Ramli, a little bit of a follow-up on the question from Jim. I'm curious at what you're seeing out there in terms of skill set as we are bringing some of those, whether it's sales, success, or marketing closer to product. Like, what do you think? What do you see in terms of evolution of skill set required for some of those resources? Just curious to see what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, I think. By the way, hello. It's good to see you again. Yeah, if people don't know, he was part of the PLG certificate program, so it's good to see you again. I think how skill set is evolving. I think I'm seeing not just skill set, but organization shift, where there's more and more like the whole front end of the experience, the marketing, customer success, even sometimes product marketing, and some product folks end up under the umbrella of a CRO, the Chief Revenue Officer. I think that one thing that teams need to do, especially as people move to PLG more and more, is really have that cross functionality. It can't really work where you have the silos. I think to really deliver the seamless experience, there needs to be no barrier between the beginning of the journey all the way to the end of the journey. So one example is having everybody in their CRO. Another example I've seen of is in Monday.com, where they reorganize so that every time, they're actually in pods where it's customer success, there's one marketing, there's one product, and there's one engineer who are working together releasing features, versus like traditionally it's product doing the research and then engineering implementing it, and then the product marketing telling customer success and other folks how to implement this. But they've kind of like, hey, we're not going to have this teams. We're going to reorganize when it's actually all in silos or in squads, essentially, without any kind of functional departments per se. So I think though that's one super key important difference is I think just having more cross-functional effort.
Hi, I'm also going to piggyback off Jim's question because I work with him, and I actually lead the team that he was kind of just describing. And we're at a point in our journey where we're trying to get on the phone with as many of our customers as we possibly can, because we've kind of invested in that team. And it's a two-way street, right? We're helping them, but then we're also getting feedback from them, which has been really helpful. Are there any tactics that you've seen that works in getting in front of someone and offering them this one-on-one time? I don't want it to come across as too salesy, like we're trying to upgrade them. I truly want it to come across that we're being helpful, which I know people are needing help, but we're having a hard time trying to figure out how to get them on the phone.
Yeah, I would say, are you finding they're getting stuck somewhere a lot? Are they getting stuck on a specific spot in the journey or the experience?
It's more like they come to our site for one thing, and we offer a lot more than that one thing that they come for, and some of them are paying for, and I want them to understand they've unlocked, but they kind of are only seeing it at a surface level. Right.
Okay. That actually helps a lot. So I think there's certain moments in the customer journey where like it's they're prime for a conversation. I think one of them is when they're frustrated. Where like, it's like, what do I do? I need help. And then when somebody comes, hey, I can help you. And it's like, hey, whatever you need help with, I can get you help here. So that's like one end on the emotional spectrum, which is frustration. But the other end of the emotional spectrum is like happiness. And usually that happens when they accomplish something like a win or accomplish something within your product. Going back to the example of the CRM, like sending their first tweet would be like, hey, congrats, you sent your first tweet. And it's like not an automated message where it feels like it's actually sent something like, and then based on that, now that could be a good conversation starter would be when there's an emotional high. And just congratulating them, I would be more inclined to open an email and respond if somebody's like, congrats, Ramli, I saw that you were able to do this. Like, would love to show you like what other cases, how other use potentially like what other use cases, or even asking if I need help with anything would be, I'd be more open to it if I was happy than if I was neutral. So I guess you can catch them when they're frustrated, or you can catch them when they're super happy would be. I guess I'd
rather find them when they're happy.
I mean, jumping on a frustrated frustrated user or customer could be very helpful, because then I'm frustrated, and somebody actually reach out rather than me waiting to do something about it.
Thank you.
One thing I am curious about, Ramli, is so obviously most of the folks here are at product-led companies trying to optimize their onboarding processes. I'm curious if you've seen traditional top-down SaaS businesses try to implement a product-led onboarding process and what that looks like.
Yeah, I have seen that. I think that's the real challenge is, first of all, like getting buy-in, getting buy-in for it, especially like, when something's working with the top-down sales led approach, it's super hard to go the product-led route. I think just showing the data, especially with self-serve and finding champions and actually speaking their language. One of the things I've heard, especially when like getting buy-in from sales, especially in a sales-led organization, would be, instead of saying, hey, we're going to improve our onboarding, it'd be like, wouldn't it be great if we can deliver leads that are better qualified because of what they've done in your product? Like how much likely would you close those, how much more likely do you think you're going to close those leads versus like a cold outbound? So now I'm trying to convey it in like, what's in it for you? It's like, okay, if we improve our onboarding, then we'll see more people using our product, and when they talk to you, to the sales team, then they're more likely to be open to a conversation. They're more likely to convert, and you'll do less work for close those sales. I think that's one thing I've heard. Actually, going back to Jungle Scout, that's exactly what they did with the conversations they had when they were very, very sales led and doubled down on product led onboarding.
Thank you. That's a very insightful response. Where it's coming from is, I feel like even companies that offer like a free trial, the onboarding piece is so important to get right. And even if your whole business isn't completely optimized for product led, that feels like an area where if you get it right, it could be huge value add for the end user.
100%, yeah.
I have a question, kind of like something that I got a lot of pushback from when I was on a growth team and really pushing for thinking about like user onboarding. And one of the pushback I got from the engineering team was like, well, we shouldn't overinvest in like these in-app tours and things like that, because we should actually just be working on making our product so intuitive that you don't need an onboarding experience.
Right.
Like, what would you say to someone like that who doesn't believe that there is like a necessity for an onboarding experience at all?
That's another great question. I guess I'm trying to figure out how to get data. I guess that's one way to pull it. Like if you can get data where that's even a subset. And I think that's where potentially a third-party tool like Appcues or Pendo or Chameleon or UserPilot could be helpful just to try it out. The good thing about those tools are they're typically the trial is usage-based. So you'll be able to use it. So it's not like the way the trial works is not time-based. It's like 14 days where you take 100 100 users, you can show it to 100 users for free without having to pay for it. And hopefully that can give you enough data around there to show it. It's not even paying for just like 1 month, just so that you can back it up with data and just implement it through that. Hopefully, if the companies have some kind of tool like to install that easily through Segment or something else, that would be even better. The other conversation around those things is like going back to the conversation around. I do agree. Sometimes tours are a crutch for a lot of companies where like, users lost. let's implement a product tour. Versus I think the biggest win sometimes is something just fixing up empty states and seeing those improvements. And like when somebody lands on this empty dashboard, just having it clear, like once again, here's what you're going to be able to achieve once you schedule this. I keep going back to the CRM example. Once you schedule that tweet, you'll be able to get more impressions, all this. You'll save like 20 hours a week. I'm not entirely sure. If you're ready to start saving time, set up your first tweet here or set up your thing here first. I think having those simple, easy wins there could give you enough data without even getting those third-party tools. Or you'll say, hey, look, we just tweaked this little thing here, and we are now seeing more users turn into customers. And they're not just turning into customers, they're actually sticking around. Look at the retention curve. Look at the retention rates on these users who have seen this experience. Now you're like, oh, okay, it makes business sense. Like it's now hitting our bottom line that we're building customers that are happier and staying longer term because of this simple improvement there.
Yeah, agreed. Actually, like what happened in that conversation was we then did implement a product tour and we were able to show the data. But one of the things we realized is like, no matter how much onboarding we did, we needed a human in the process. So that was like our discovery was that we were trying to solve for everything in a really self-serve way, like either through making product improvements to empty states or through the product tours. But what we were missing was actually like one human component. Actually, I was biased towards the self-serve motion. I was like, we don't need a salesperson in this, like not at all. Right. And the data told me actually like this one step, it's not solvable. Like cannot solve it through self-serve, need to involve a human.
Yeah, I really love, I'm a big fan of adding, when adding humans actually adds value, then it becomes magical. I think often like, our users don't want to talk to somebody, but to your example there, like there are times where like they want it, they need it, and they're actually looking for it, and they just can't really figure out how to do it. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ramli. If people want to learn more about product-led onboarding or ask you questions, where can they go?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Ramli John, on LinkedIn as well, Ramli John. And if you want to check out the first chapter of the book, you can go to just onboardingbook.com, and that should give you the first chapter for free.
I love that.
Free
You have
trial.
a product that's
Free trial of the book.
hilarious.
The book's like $5, so like it's not very. You can get it on anywhere on Amazon, anywhere in the world.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here. I learned a ton. I'm just going to take away physics and video games into my next couple of meetings. This was awesome. It's stuck in my brain now, and I'm going to think about that all the time. But really appreciate it. You truly are an expert on all of this, and thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, and somebody made a comment about superhuman and pitch plugging in humans. I totally agree. I think those are great examples.
Totally, I agree.
And as well as Eddie, I love what you guys are doing in Focus. Big fan.
Thank you. Cool. Talk to you all soon.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.